Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam gặp gỡ cộng đồng người Việt ở San Jose. Kính thưa quý khán thính giả, chiều thứ Ba ngày 18 tháng 2 năm 2020, hai dân biểu liên bang Hoa Kỳ gồm bà Zoe Lofgren và bà Anna Eshoo đã tổ chức buổi gặp gỡ giữa Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam, ông Daniel Kritenbrink, và cộng đồng người Việt tại phòng họp Hội đồng Giám sát quận hạt Santa Clara, tọa lạc tại số 70 West Hedding Street, thành phố San Jose, mục đích để thông báo về mối quan hệ song phương của Hoa Kỳ với Việt Nam. Đại sứ chia sẻ quan điểm của ông về những cơ hội và thách thức mà ông gặp phải, và ông muốn nghe ý kiến của người Mỹ gốc Việt về những gì có thể làm hơn nữa để hỗ trợ lợi ích quốc gia của Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam. Mời quý vị theo dõi toàn bộ buổi gặp gỡ như sau.
From the ambassador on some comments that he has, but I want to take this opportunity to share again with you the concerns as we see the Vietnamese government eager to establish deeper economic and military ties with the United States. Over recent years, the human rights situation in Vietnam has actually worsened. As chair of the Congressional Caucus on Vietnam, I've worked with many of my colleagues to condemn the government's human rights violations, urging them to protect basic liberties for their citizens, and we've also called on the Trump administration to push for these changes. Now, earlier this month, I sent a letter with other members of the Vietnam Caucus to the Vietnamese Prime Minister asking that they end the crackdown on human rights activists and to release all prisoners of conscience. As we know, freedom of expression has become even more hindered with new cybersecurity laws going into effect requiring online businesses, including Facebook and Google, to store their data inside Vietnam so that the user information could be turned over to the government. The law on belief and religion in Vietnam continues to allow for the persecution of religious minorities. And once again, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has called on the State Department to designate Vietnam as a country of particular concern in its most recent report. We've also seen unwarranted government land grabs that lead to forced evictions and demolitions, especially of vulnerable communities. I have urged, along with others, to ask the Trump administration to investigate this further and to protect human rights. And of course, we've once again introduced the Vietnam Human Rights Act. Now, I'll introduce Ambassador Kritenbrink in just a minute, but before I do, I would like to call forward someone who I work with every single day in the United States Congress, someone who is my friend and who I admire a great deal, and that is Congresswoman Anna Eshoo.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Good. It's an honor to join with Congresswoman Lofgren to welcome the U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam. It's always special for me to be with her. How proud are we of Congresswoman Lofgren to see her leadership, to see her extraordinary leadership as a House manager, and you all know her work over the decades on behalf of the Vietnamese American community. She worked right here in these chambers for 14 years as a member of the County Board of Supervisors, and then, thank God, she came to the Congress 2 years after I did. So thank you for your extraordinary leadership on all of these issues. You know that she is the leading expert in the Congress on immigration. And we all learn from her and we follow her lead, and certainly on the issues impacting this community. The U.S.-Vietnam relationship has come a long way since the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. And there are many important steps that were taken. The end of the U.S. trade embargo on Vietnam and the growth in trade and investment between both countries, the normalization of diplomatic relations. And it was a former member of Congress that was the first U.S. ambassador to Vietnam. Ambassador Pete Peterson, and we served with him in the Congress. Such a fine man. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam and then returned there, imagine, as the first U.S. ambassador when the normalization took place. There have been joint maritime exercises in the South China Sea, and of course the very important cooperative effort to return the remains of U.S. POWs and MIA personnel, which has really helped both nations to move past the dark and difficult history of the war. I'm especially proud of the work that we've done in Congress to provide Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries with financial assistance to remove the dangerous unexploded landmines and ordnance left over from the war. This still threatens people's lives. My son has worked not only as a member of the Peace Corps in Southeast Asia, but remained in the region, working in Vietnam, working in Laos as I speak. I remember my mother saying to him, Paul, are you happy in your work? And he said, I love it, Nani. And she said, don't you think you could do something that you would love and be closer to home? So he really has given his adult life to the people of that region. And firsthand, thank you. Aren't you kind? He has shared his personal stories with me about the young people and farmers who have lost their lives or lost their limbs because of the unexploded ordinances. So since 1993, we have appropriated in the Congress more than $132 million in foreign assistance to Vietnam to destroy these horrific weapons. And last year I introduced, and of course Congresswoman Lofgren, very much a part of this effort, to authorize an additional $200 million for assistance to Vietnam and the neighboring countries, Laos and Cambodia. So these are really very important efforts to really help protect innocent people. But we have a lot more work to do. Congresswoman Lofgren has certainly raised the flag about the serious steps that need to be taken relative to Vietnam's human rights record and to end the suppression of basic freedoms, including religious freedom. This is something that this is one of the great values of the United States of America, and I think it's one of its most important exports, religious freedom for people around the world. And I think that the United States, as well as the international community, must hold Vietnam accountable on these issues. I'm a first-generation American, so the story of immigration, what immigrants bring to the United States is pure gold, is pure gold. And Mr. Ambassador, for you to come and meet with the community is an eloquent statement about the Vietnamese American community, which is the largest Vietnamese American community in the entire United States. The backbone of the economy of our region that we call Silicon Valley. We have many issues that need to be resolved. This is something that the ambassador can't say himself, but certainly Congresswoman Lofgren and I and so many others were shocked to see the Trump administration end a decades-long agreement that bars the repatriation of Vietnamese immigrants who arrived before the reestablishment of diplomatic relations in 1995. The administration's change in policy actually is targeting immigrants with decades-old minor legal infractions, which we believe are cruel and unjust, just plain wrong. I think it stains our nation's legacy of welcoming individuals into our communities, and this is a policy that is the opposite of that. To Congresswoman Lofgren, thank you for making me a part of this. It's very special to me to be here with you, and to welcome our ambassador, who is a superb career part of the diplomatic corps of our country, for flying to California, for being here in San Jose, and the work that he's doing to hold Vietnam accountable for not only its record on human rights, but to also strengthen the ties between both countries. So thank you for your warm welcome. It's an honor to be with you, and it's lovely. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Now to introduce Ambassador Kritenbrink. You know, as Anna, as you mentioned, I have some disagreements with the Trump administration. I wish that they would have their State Department designate Vietnam a country of particular concern because of their violation of religious freedom. I wish that they, as a government, would press Vietnam to improve its human rights record. I wish that they would stop deporting people who've lived as legal residents of the United States for decades for some minor offense 25 or 30 years ago. That's not right. Having said that, Ambassador Kritenbrink is a career civil servant. He has been in the State Department for 26 years, almost all of it in Asia, and career civil servants have a policy of not criticizing whichever president they serve under. They don't set the policy of the United States government. They implement whatever policy that is. I will say that Ambassador Kritenbrink has been very responsive to me. Last year, an American citizen from my district was arrested by the Vietnamese, and I got on the phone, and Ambassador Kritenbrink answered my phone call, and he gave me his personal email address, and then he went to bat, and we made sure that that American citizen was released, and I'm grateful to him for that. He is here just to say a few things, and then I think he primarily wants to listen to what you have to say that he can incorporate in his heart. So with that, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Dan Kritenbrink.
Well, good afternoon. I am so excited to be here in San Jose. It's an honor to see all of you, and I appreciate your taking time out of your busy day to spend time with me here. I particularly want to thank Representatives Lofgren and Eshoo for organizing and co-hosting this forum. It's a tremendous honor for me to be here. As Representative Lofgren mentioned a moment ago, my objective here today is very simple. I want to pay my respects to, I want to tell you how grateful I am to the Vietnamese American community, all 2 million strong, for the tremendous and invaluable contributions you've made to the development of our great country. I thank you for that. I thank you as well for your perspectives on our relationship today with Vietnam. I hope to learn from you. I hope to get your suggestions. I hope to hear your concerns so that I can better represent our country's interests and your interests as well as I engage with the government and the leaders of Vietnam on a daily basis. I have had the privilege of serving as America's ambassador to Vietnam since November of 2017. It's taken me a couple of years to finally be able to come here to California and to have an opportunity to meet here. I had planned to come last January, some of you may recall, and the U.S. government shutdown at the time prevented us from holding this event, but I'm really honored to be here today. I wanted to make some brief comments at the top about what we're trying to achieve in our relationship with Vietnam today. This year marks the 25th anniversary of our bilateral relationship with Vietnam. I feel tremendously privileged to serve as your ambassador in Vietnam. We've come a long way together in the past 25 years by facing squarely historical issues and the legacy of war and its impact on our people. And today I'm happy to report that in areas as diverse as trade, development, education, healthcare, energy, and security, the United States and Vietnam are working together with a shared commitment to peace and prosperity. Maybe the simplest way I can begin to explain what we're trying to achieve in Vietnam is to share with you the mission statement of the U.S. mission to Vietnam. We have nearly 1,000 employees in U.S. Mission Vietnam at our embassy in Hanoi and our consulate general in Ho Chi Minh City, more than 200 Americans and more than 700 local staff. And our mission statement is that we are there to support the development of a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam that contributes to international security, engages in free, fair, and reciprocal trade, and respects human rights and the rule of law. And I think if you focus on that mission statement, you can see very clearly what we're there to do. It is in America's national interest to see Vietnam to succeed, to see a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam. But we want that Vietnam then to be our partner in advancing our shared interests related to security, to economics and trade, and of course, human rights and the rule of law as well. Speaking specifically of trade, our relationship has grown exponentially. 25 years ago, our countries had almost zero trade. Today, the United States and Vietnam conduct almost $78 billion in annual bilateral trade, even though the United States continues to run a substantial and growing trade deficit with Vietnam. So we're committed to achieving free, fair, and reciprocal trade and investment with Vietnam by reducing barriers to American companies. But we're also focused on seizing the incredible opportunities that Vietnam's growth presents in sectors ranging from energy and healthcare to transportation infrastructure. There are opportunities there that benefit both of our countries. Vietnam, despite the trade deficit, is one of America's fastest growing export markets. More and more U.S. companies are working with Vietnamese companies. I believe that our economic futures are linked. On humanitarian and war legacy issues, I think Representative Eshoo spoke eloquently to the importance of that work and the impact it's had on our bilateral relationship. I believe that our work on humanitarian and legacy of war issues has done more than perhaps any other single issue to build trust and goodwill between our two countries. We continue our close cooperation with Vietnam to account for our missing personnel. There remain 1,246 missing Americans from the war. But through close cooperation on a daily basis with the government of Vietnam over the last nearly 3 decades, we've accounted for more than 700 Americans, and that important work continues and will continue until we account for every missing American from the war. We're also working to clean up dioxin from Agent Orange, remove landmines and unexploded ordnance, and assist Vietnamese people with disabilities. For example, in November of 2018, I had the privilege of participating in a ceremony celebrating the completion of our work at the Da Nang International Airport to clean up dioxin or Agent Orange contamination there in a project in which the U.S. invested more than $110 million. Last April, I participated in a ceremony in which we launched similar cleanup efforts at the Bien Hoa Air Base outside of Ho Chi Minh City in an even larger project. And I think these projects, they remove a health threat to the Vietnamese public. They open up new areas and new land for use, and I do think they help build trust between our two great countries. Regarding unexploded ordnance, the United States has also invested significantly since 1993 more than $100 million to clear unexploded ordnance, particularly in the province of Guangxi. In my last trip to Guangxi province last year, I was told by officials there that just a decade ago, every year, more than 70 Vietnamese people were killed and injured every year from unexploded ordnance. I'm happy to report today that in the last 2 years there have been 0 accidents, 0 deaths, and that's explicitly, thank you, that's explicitly linked to the unexploded ordnance work funded by the U.S. government that's having a great impact, a positive impact on the daily life of Vietnamese citizens. And as I mentioned, our work in treating Vietnamese with disabilities to improve their lives goes on as well. Our security ties are growing and have become one of the most important parts of our relationship as well. We are conducting a number of activities to build Vietnam's defense capacity, particularly the capacity of the Vietnamese Coast Guard, so that Vietnam can understand and defend its maritime interests in the face of growing challenges in the region. And together we're working on common challenges both in the South China Sea and more broadly on issues related to North Korea. Our people-to-people ties grow stronger every day. Today, nearly 30,000 young Vietnamese are studying in the United States. As I tell my friends in Vietnam, every year we're creating 30,000 new goodwill ambassadors for the U.S.-Vietnam partnership. I know that these young Vietnamese students will return to Vietnam with a world-class education, and they'll contribute to a thriving economy in Vietnam and to the growth of the U.S.-Vietnam partnership. I'm also happy to report that the United States of America is incredibly popular in Vietnam. We have a 96% favorability rating in Vietnam today, and I think it shows again the strength of the growing people-to-people ties between our two countries. So I think the progress that we've made in the U.S.-Vietnam relationship over the past 25 years has been nothing less than extraordinary. There are, of course, significant challenges as well. Even though I'm optimistic about the future of the U.S.-Vietnam partnership, I also recognize that we face some significant challenges. Those challenges can only be addressed through honest, open, and candid dialogue. I think the most significant challenge that I'd like to mention here today is human rights and religious freedom. I can commit to you that for the U.S. government, for the Trump administration, for the U.S. mission to Vietnam, human rights and religious freedom will remain a fundamental, central element of our foreign policy. It will be a fundamental, thank you, fundamental, central element of my engagement going forward. I think the picture in Vietnam is decidedly mixed when it comes to human rights and religious freedom. The trend over the past 4 years of increased arrests, convictions, and harsh sentences of peaceful activists is deeply troubling. And aside from our annual human rights dialogue, which will convene this year for the 24th time, I routinely raise our concerns in my meetings with Vietnam's top leaders. My intent is to send a message that only through sustained progress on human rights will the U.S.-Vietnam partnership reach its full potential. I do want to say a further word about human rights and religious freedom, though. I mentioned that the picture is mixed. I meet regularly with a broad array of civil society activists, of religious believers, and other rights advocates in Vietnam. And what they tell me is that they themselves are very optimistic about Vietnam's future, including the development of civil society and the increased respect for rights in Vietnam. And even though the trend lines, as I've mentioned over the past 4 years, in many areas have been negative, and we must focus on those areas and we must hold Vietnam to account. The most sensitive activists in Vietnam tell me that we should be optimistic for the long-term trends, and we should also recognize some of the progress that is taking place in Vietnam. I'm honored that I get to meet with so many different Vietnamese people on a daily basis, and I too share that optimism. When you think of the dynamism and the energy and the skill of the Vietnamese people, you can't help but feel optimistic about their future. But I do want to again reassure you that human rights and religious freedom will remain central to our engagement. We are well aware of the challenges that are present in Vietnam today, and as I often share with my Vietnamese counterparts, the United States of America raises these issues first and foremost because it's part of our DNA. It's who we are. It's what we believe. But secondly, we raise these issues because, as I said at the outset, we want to support the development of a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam. And I think all Americans will agree that the most successful countries, the most prosperous societies, the most stable countries in the world, they treat their people in a certain way. They respect the rights of their people in certain ways. And so we're going to continue to be very active in this area. But I just wanted to underscore to you, that is why we raise these issues, and we'll continue to do so going forward. I'm optimistic because I mentioned that I've already witnessed the strength of the bonds between the United States and Vietnam. I've witnessed so many friendships of all generations between people of goodwill on both sides. I think that's what defines the U.S.-Vietnam partnership. I believe that in good faith and by working with the government and people of Vietnam, I think we can overcome these challenges. Now, there are many, many other areas of cooperation that are taking place between the United States and Vietnam, and I'd be happy to get into those in the question and answer session. The single largest team within the U.S. mission to Vietnam is our health team. We're very active right now responding to the COVID-19 or the coronavirus situation. We have a large team that works on energy issues, on issues related to the environment, protection of the welfare of American citizens in Vietnam and the like. But today I wanted to give you an overview of some of what we're doing. Most of you I know are here today because you have deep and personal ties to Vietnam. I'm honored to be part of this town hall, along with your congressional representatives, to address your questions about the bilateral relationship, the region, and other challenges that our two countries face. But my commitment to you is I'm here primarily to learn, to listen to you, and to learn how better, again, I can represent our country and your interests in Vietnam. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you very much.
Now-
We will now turn the little, we'll take, you can sit here and we'll turn the around so people can come forward with questions. And I will note also that Anna and I were able to come here in person, but Congressman Ro Khanna and Congressman Jimmy Panetta had to be elsewhere. They have representatives from their offices here in the audience to listen to you as well, and I did want you to know about that. So we have at least a half an hour or more. If people want to come forward and ask questions or give us a viewpoint, we would welcome hearing your point of view as well. So just come forward, and if you can be concise, that would be appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone.
We need a mic. I know.
I think it picks it up automatically.
That's it. Yeah. My name is Bùi Văn Phú. I'm a freelance for the BBC and VOA, and I was a former Peace Corps volunteer in Africa. So, to Congresswoman Eshoo and Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, please support us, because in the new budget of President Trump, he cut the Peace Corps budget, so please support that. But for Mr. Ambassador, my question regarding to the Peace Corps program in Vietnam. 12 years ago, I remember I had come to the meeting with Ambassador Michael Mikalak. He mentioned that the program was initiated by them, I believe 2008 or something, in San Jose here. And then during the visit of President Obama to Vietnam in 2015, and we do sign a memorandum between US and Vietnam to open the program to send the teacher trainer, English teacher trainer to Vietnam. But for my colleagues and my friends, late of last year, I talked to them. She's a Peace Corps director in South Pacific, and she said that the program did not pick up yet. So can you give us the assessment? Because I believe that any good relation between the two countries, as I experienced as a former Peace Corps volunteer, that's part of the program to develop the relation between the two countries. And Peace Corps has sent volunteers to like hundreds of countries already. And I'd like to hear from you what the status of that program in Vietnam now. And secondly, also in terms of development, the relation between US and Vietnam, another consulate in Da Nang has been talking about it for many years. Vietnam has a consulate here in San Francisco and a second one in Houston. but USA has only one in Ho Chi Minh City. So to serve the people from Central Vietnam, and why we didn't have that office in Da Nang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Phu, for your questions. Let me try to answer them in turn. So on the Peace Corps, I'm delighted to hear that you're a former Peace Corps volunteer. I think the Peace Corps is one of the most effective programs that the U.S. government has. I think it's one of the most impactful programs in the entire world. We can't have Peace Corps volunteers on the ground in Vietnam soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. The sooner they're there, the sooner that our great young American Peace Corps volunteers will begin building bridges and helping to teach English to young Vietnamese people. There's literally an insatiable demand for English language education in Vietnam right now. I remain very optimistic that we will implement the Peace Corps agreement that was concluded in 2015. The challenge since 2016 rather. The challenge since then has been over the details on precisely how to implement it, but I remain very optimistic that in the near future our two sides can reach agreement and that we can have American Peace Corps volunteers on the ground in the near term. So I'm very optimistic about that. I don't have anything to announce formally today, but I hope in the near term that we can reach that agreement and get the volunteers on the ground. And I know that they will do a tremendous job, and that will benefit Vietnam, that will benefit the United States and our partnership. On your second question about the consulate in Da Nang, I would say two things. Da Nang is one of my favorite cities in Vietnam, very important city. I travel there regularly, as do my colleagues in the U.S. mission to Vietnam. So whether we have a consulate on the ground or not, I think our friends can rest assured that American interests are being well represented in Da Nang. I'm not aware of any plans right now in the near term to increase our diplomatic footprint in Vietnam. I can share with you that one focus we have right now is on facilities and ensuring that we have appropriate, new, modern, secure facilities for the U.S. mission in Vietnam. But the focus there is on our footprint in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City.
I'll just add on the overall question, President Trump has recommended a number of ill-advised budget cuts, the Peace Corps being one of them. It is not the intention of the Congress to agree with the President on those reductions. And if people want to come forward, just form a line, and then we'll have one by one people speak.
Hi. First, thank you very much for putting together a show like this, Congresswoman Eshoo and Congressman Lofgren. And Mr. Ambassador, welcome home. My name is Dan Huang, and I'm a head of Vietnam in local area. I have three questions for you, Mr. Ambassador. Question number one regarding trade. In your debriefing, you said about the trade relationship between the two countries in terms of the deficit and in terms of other development. Let me remind you something just happened recently. President Trump just put the name of Vietnam outside of the list of those development country and also underdeveloped country. I want to hear your take. Why President Trump did that, and what would be the impact for Vietnam economy? Question number two regarding your debriefing on maritime security. As you remember, back in 2017, the U.S. Navy transferred a huge U.S. Coast Guard Morgenthau from Hawaii, and then it turned out to be Cảnh sát biển 80-20. And during Mr. Ashton Carter on the defense side, he transferred tons of patrol boats from as a metal shock. Whatever happened to them? Why the government of Vietnam never put them into use? That's a huge investment from the United States and from taxpayers like this. And the third question for you, Ambassador Kritenbrink. Recently, if you remember Đồng crackdown, I have very frustrated about the development of those who put a crackdown on the resident of Đồng and also what is the role of U.S. Embassy on such a mishap? And thank you again. Welcome home, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions, and I'm delighted to be back home. Thank you very much. Let me start on trade, and I don't know if I'm following exactly the development that you track, that you mentioned, but let me say just a word or two about our trade relationship in general. Our economic and trading relationship with Vietnam is central to our partnership. Vital American interests are at stake in that relationship. There are tremendous opportunities to be seized in the trading relationship, and I outlined some of them in energy, healthcare, IT, transportation, and the like. Our greatest concern right now, though, is ensuring that barriers to trade, particularly non-tariff barriers that unfairly discriminate against American firms, are removed, particularly in the face of the growing trade deficit. So whether it's market access for agricultural goods or automobiles or issues related to electronic payments and the like, we're very engaged with the Vietnamese to make sure that our companies can compete on a fair and level playing field. That's the focus of our efforts. We're also, of course, promoting many of the great products and services that America's world-class companies have to offer. I'm happy to report that even though the trade deficit has grown significantly last year, U.S. exports are also up significantly, up almost 12%. So there is good news as well, but that is our focus on the trade side. On maritime security, what I would say is that, again, this is one of our most important areas of engagement with Vietnam, given the serious challenges that Vietnam faces in the maritime realm, and our common interest in ensuring peace, stability, and prosperity in areas like the South China Sea. The United States has provided to date 18 of the metal shark boats that you mentioned. Another 6 will be provided. These ships are used on a daily basis. I've seen them. I've ridden on them. They're playing an invaluable role in assisting Vietnam in understanding what's happening in its maritime domain and defending its rights. But it's in America's interest to provide that assistance, because we believe when all countries have the means to understand what's happening in their maritime domain and defend their interests, that raises the threshold for conflict, that further contributes to the peace and security of the South China Sea that we all benefit from. When the Secretary of Defense Esper was recently in Vietnam, he announced the planned transfer of a second Coast Guard cutter to Vietnam, and I've also seen the first Coast Guard cutter that we transferred, and it also is playing an active role in the Vietnamese Coast Guard. So I think the American public can rest assured that this security assistance is in America's interest, and it's being fully utilized by our Vietnamese partners. On the third question related to the Đông Tam crackdown, I would say that we too are very concerned about developments there. We've watched those developments very closely. We've expressed our deep regret over the loss of life that took place in the village there. And we've stated that it is our hope and our expectation that both sides would resolve these issues peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law. I hope that answers your questions.
So, good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
So, my name is Nguyen. I am from the Independent Journalists Association of Vietnam with Mr. Pham Chi Dũng. So, I have only 2 short questions about your view. The first question is asked you already about the Đông Tam case. You know, the Mr. Lê Đình Kình was being killed. It hurt us even we live peacefully in the U.S. So we would like to know about your opinion, about your view about this Đông Tam case. The second thing I would like to ask you, because we are a member of the IGAVN and we are so close to Mr. Pham Chi Dũng. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about the arrest of Mr. Pham Chi Dũng? And we urge you to ask the president to release Mr. Phạm Chi Dũng as soon as possible. And by the way, some people, some of friends who meet you on last July 4 in Vietnam, in Embassy on Vietnam, like Mr. Nguyễn Tường Thủy. He is very happy to see you next time.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let me ask your, let me try to answer your questions. Let me reiterate that on the Dong Thăm situation, again, it's something that we have followed very closely. As diplomats, we try to not just observe, but also talk with relevant people who have views on such a situation so that we can have as full a picture as possible as to what happened in Dong Thăm village. As you know, the underlying issue is a long-standing property dispute. What I can say here today is that we have stated very clearly our concern over the loss of life that took place there. And we've reiterated our expectation that these issues would be handled peacefully in accordance with the rule of law. But beyond that, it's somewhat difficult for me as an American diplomat to know exactly what happened on the ground, even though I think all of us have heard various accounts. But I think what we want to focus on is expressing our concern and regret over the loss of life and our hope that these issues can be resolved peacefully going forward. On the detention of Phạm Chi Dũng, perhaps you can tell me more about the Phạm Chi Dũng case, but let me just say that we raise individual human rights cases on a regular basis. Human rights issues can't just be about abstract principles, even though those principles are important. They have to be about individual cases as well. We do advocate regularly on individual cases, and I'm happy to report that our advocacy in several instances has resulted in the release of certain individuals, including in some cases the release of individuals to the United States. So we'll continue to be active on individual cases, but perhaps you could share with me more, or if you wanted to do it privately right after we're done here, maybe you could share with me more about that specific case. Okay.
Ambassador, do you have someone from your staff here?
Yes.
Maybe this gentleman
That's a
could
great
give
idea.
him the details,
So Alex-
and then we can follow up on it.
Alex Denoye is one of our Vietnam desk officers from the State Department. If you could share the details, I'd be happy to follow up. Thank you. That's a great suggestion.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Congress Member Eshoo and Congress Member Zoe Lofgren for organizing this meeting, and thank you for being close to our community over the years. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being here. My name is Sam Ho, a member of this San Jose community. And thank you for sharing with us about the human rights as well as religious freedom, the importance of that for the community, especially in Vietnam. And that's one of the major concerns for our Vietnamese community in America. We can continue to fight for human rights and religious freedom for Vietnam, besides the freedom and others areas of human rights. So in terms of your service there, I understand it's been a little over 2 years. And if you can share with us some of the major accomplishments for those 2 years, and maybe emphasize what are the top 3 priorities for the area of human rights and religious freedom for the year 2020, and how do we know, and how do you know that you have achieved that in terms of accountability? I appreciate if you can share with us your success as well as your priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ho, those are outstanding questions. Questions are getting harder with every presenter, and I appreciate that. That's why I'm here. I would say our engagement is focused on probably 2 broad themes. The first is individual case advocacy. I carry in my wallet every day a card that lists some of the individual cases that we advocate for most regularly. And again, I don't want to get into the details of those names here today, but some of them I'm sure you already know because they were high-profile cases that were released to the United States based on our advocacy. But there have been other cases that we've quietly raised. Now, I should say, It's disappointing that it would take the advocacy of the United States government to get improved treatment for someone or to have someone released. And it is disappointing that sometimes the only positive outcome can be the release of that person to the United States rather than having them be released in Vietnam and let them pursue their own lives. But nonetheless, we continue to believe in the importance of advocating on individual cases. The second main thrust of our work is on improving the legal and the policy environment related to human rights and religious freedom. I think the one issue on which I've been most active has probably been the law on belief in religion. As I'm sure you're aware, it's a complex law that represents some positive developments and some steps back. And in talking with members of the community, I think their views on the law are mixed. Improved and more clear registration processes for some religions, particularly long-established, well-known religions. And yet the situation, I think, has worsened for some, for other religious adherents. So I think we'll focus, and my advocacy with the Religious Affairs Commission and with others has been on ensuring that the law is implemented in a fair way. I've also engaged quite actively with the Catholic Church in Vietnam and have heard the situation for Catholic believers in various regions in Vietnam to understand, again, some of the challenges and some of the progress that they've made. I think the other place where we're active on sort of the policy and the legal environment is related to media and internet freedom. My probably single largest concern right now with the legal realm in Vietnam is the new cybersecurity law that was passed last year. I think that the law as written has had a chilling effect and could have a very negative impact on the freedom of expression online, and could also have a very negative impact on the U.S.-Vietnam trade relationship and the activities of U.S. companies in Vietnam, especially certain content providers. So we've been incredibly active, and I as ambassador have been very active on expressing our concerns about the cybersecurity law and trying to shape its implementation. I'm happy to say that to date, the implementing regulation for the cybersecurity law has not been implemented, mostly due to concerns expressed by the United States and other like-minded countries, and we'll continue to advocate on those issues. I think some of the other areas that you'll see us continue to be active on would be labor, disability rights, and legal reform, including the Penal Code and Civil Procedure Code. But I hope that gives you a sense of our top priorities, but it will continue to be focused on individual cases and trying to improve the legal and the regulatory environment as much as possible.
And I do want to ask the question about how can you engage our Vietnamese American community here to help you to succeed more in what you do for our country.
I appreciate
and, Council Member Zoe Lofgren has been working closely with our community here, also besides Council Member Eshoo, but she was a member of the Board of Trustees for San Jose Evergreen Community College District, who I'm an employee there, so we have a close ties there. But if you can help us, can stay in contact with us, can you commit to staying in touch with us, engage with us, maybe through Council Member Zoe Lofgren's office in our district, and we can make some meaningful activities happen whenever that's needed. Can you commit to that?
I absolutely, and
good idea.
I won't speak for Representative Lofgren, but I will just say that I've had the pleasure of being in close touch with Representative Lofgren and other members of the Vietnam caucus since I've become ambassador. We've met several times face to face. We've often spoken on the phone. I have a standing monthly call with various members of the caucus as well. So I do feel like I have a good channel into the views of this community. So that channel is very much open, but you're also more than welcome to reach out to the State Department or the U.S. Mission or to me directly as well. But I do feel like we've had a very good channel established with members of Congress.
We can explore further, maybe doing periodically a video conference. But I think we also need to make in our minds a distinction between what the ambassador is able to do and the call that's being made by the president, and it's not him. So we need to advocate here for human rights and for freedom. He may or may not be able to do everything we want.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. My name is Jimmy, Hmong from Vietnam. I live in Minnesota. Yeah, as 10 years I live in the United States. Yeah, I have some information to share with you and some questions asking you because we are Hmong in Vietnam right now. We have 1.5 million in Vietnam. We always support for the Vietnam government long time ago until 1989. The Hmong become Christian because listen for radio broadcasting. That's why we had a lot of problem for the persecution, for Christian persecution. 2007, 2005 to 2007, we're living in North Vietnam. A lot of people destroy all the house and all the church, the Hmong church. That's why we run. A lot of people die in the jail. The leader and the pastor, they put in the jail, including my staying in the jail 9 years in jail. We run to the South Vietnam, the central South Vietnam. Until right now, we have I got the information, 101,000 family don't have the registration of housing home. Until right now, they don't have any paperwork with the family. I just use two villages, for example, one village called 179 village in Lang Dong, 98 family. 23 years, they don't have any document, any registration in Vietnam. Like the people, the children cannot go to school, and cannot open a bank account, and cannot apply any product to use for the government. The second village for Ban Duang Ke is 178 family. It's 19 years now, and they don't have anything to this village too. That's why I want to share this information with you for the South Vietnam. And the second message is I want to share for the Hmong in Thailand. We run to some Hmong to Thailand, to refugee in Thailand. About 15 years now, some family to 15 years, 8 years, 9 years, 5 years, still not going to the third country, still living in Thailand. Very difficult for the Hmong refugee in Thailand. The difficult thing last year I go to Burma because the Hmong 2011, the Hmong Indian Bien Phu, they had a situation to asking the government because the government in Vietnam to take all the Hmong land, destroy the Hmong house, that together to 2011. The government take a lot of people put in the jail. Someone died in the jail. They run in the jungle, go to Burma, Myanmar. Now living in Myanmar, last year I go visit Myanmar, 600 family living in the jungle. And they cannot survive everything. And put the children, the women in the jungle. And the men had to go to China to work in China to find food to support the women in the jungle. That's a very dangerous place. I just have some information to share with you. I have some document here, but I my phone number, my email here put here. You want to know more the information, I can provide the information for you to the Hmong situation in Vietnam. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
I can say that I have generally been aware of the challenges that the Hmong community has faced in Vietnam. I've had the pleasure of meeting some members of that community in Vietnam, but I appreciate you for educating me further. I look forward to reading what you've provided here today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador Kritenbrink.
Nice to see you.
My name is Khan Wing, President of San Jose. I have two questions for you, but quick.
Please.
The first question is, please share with us about U.S. policy regarding China's aggressive policy in East Sea,
The second question is, please comment on Exxon Mobil partner with Petro Vietnam to exploit the oil well in the Red Sea. That's the two questions I have for you. You got it?
Thank you very much. Those are important
But
questions.
before that, I got small thing. It still bother me. I had a kid. My friend had a kid in Vietnam, and he sent the kid to an American, USA to study. After he finished 4 years, go back to Vietnam. He find a job to support the family. You know what? He cannot find a job. He work. He apply the job at Nortel telephone company, that government central control for all communication in Vietnam. He cannot get a job. You know what? They find a job for him. What job they give him? The security. The guy finished 4 year degree in American, very smart boy, and still get discriminated like a second citizen in Vietnam. That you need to looking for that thing, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hui, for your questions. Let me start by responding on our policy towards the EC, or the South China Sea. I think you characterized the situation correctly by talking about China's aggressive stance towards the South China Sea. When I talk about America's approach to the South China Sea, I often like to point to 3 elements of our strategy. First is diplomatic. We continue to work with our like-minded partners in the region, which includes Vietnam, to advocate for and express our clearly shared views on the need for all disputes in the South China Sea to be resolved peacefully and in accordance with international law. We believe that all claims must be based in international law. We do not think that large countries should attempt to bully small countries. We do not think that it is right for China to interfere with the long-standing energy exploration activities of countries like Vietnam in the South China Sea. So you'll continue to see the United States, together with our like-minded partners on these issues, including Vietnam, be very active diplomatically, including in the various fora related to ASEAN. The second element of our strategy is related to capacity building. I mentioned to you the work that we're doing to build Vietnam's military capacity, particularly its maritime capacity of its Coast Guard. But that's work that we do across the region, not just with Vietnam, but with other partners like the Philippines and Malaysia, Indonesia, and others. Because again, we believe when countries have the capability to defend themselves and their interests, that contributes to stability, and that's something that's in our collective interest. And the third element of our strategy related to the South China Sea is to continue to develop and exercise America's own military capabilities. So that's why you see the U.S. Navy regularly carrying out freedom of navigation operations, carrying out joint exercises with partners in the region. So that is our strategy. And I should mention a fourth element. We also very much believe that there should be unimpeded commerce and the free flow of trade and goods to the South China Sea. And we believe that energy exploration should also continue smoothly in accordance with international law. And it is not in anyone's interest to watch China attempt to try to intimidate all international energy companies out of the South China Sea, or to try to force all countries like Vietnam to partner only with Chinese companies. So that is our strategy. This is an issue that's of great concern to the United States, and it's an issue on which we see almost completely eye to eye with our Vietnamese partners. You mentioned, if I understood correctly, ExxonMobil and the Blue Well project. All I would say is, I'd have to refer you to ExxonMobil for details of their plans. But obviously, ExxonMobil is one of our most important companies, and this is a very important energy project that we very much support going forward. And I'm sorry to hear about the situation related to your friend in Vietnam. I'm not quite sure what the details might be. I would only say that I do continue to believe in the power of educational exchange. I hope to see those continued ties developing going forward. And I continue to hope that Vietnamese students, when they go back home, they continue to make a great contribution to Vietnam's own development. Thank you very much.
As the next person is coming forward, we have until about 3:15, we have the ambassador. So we'll go to then, and if there are people who are waiting in line that we haven't got to, we'll take written questions. But let's be as brief as possible so everyone can be heard.
Honorable Congressman Eshoo, Honorable Congresswoman, thank you, Zoe Lofgren, and Honorable Ambassador Kritenbrink.
Thank you.
My name is Hiệp Nguyen. I represent Congressman Rokana to come here today. Unfortunately, Congressman Rokana could not come. So I come here as a Vietnamese American and as a representative to Congressman Rokana. So I have two parts. First part is, in your speech a while ago, you humbly said that you come here to learn about the Vietnamese American. I would like to share with you that
Thank
part. Yeah. First of all, if you look around here, these are mostly all the Vietnamese leader or Vietnamese activists in the community. In the Vietnamese community, there are two main points that we always, keep in mind. Number one, we came here because we were oppressed by the communist regime. That's the reason we come to the United States. So, number one, we always thinking about how to protect Vietnamese people from the dictatorship and from the oppression of the government. And number two, how can we protect our own country from the aggression of China, as you see recently? That's the two main ideas we always keep in mind, and I believe all of our leaders over here always think about that. That I would like to share with you. We love freedom, why we come here to the United States. We love the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of election, freedom of religion, and freedom of thinking. Thank you. That's I would like to share with you. Part number two. Congressman Rokana, he always concerned about the well-being of Vietnamese community over here, as well as whatever the Vietnamese American think about back in Vietnam, which is the people over there, which is related to human rights. I know that Ambassador Kritenbrink worked so hard to protect those people who fight for human rights. I know for sure you work so hard, yeah. But what we are thinking, and Congressman Rokana told me to ask you, is besides just talking with the Vietnam government, can we have concrete pressure on Vietnam to release about 118 prisoners? Can we have concrete pressure to do that? And I believe the United States can do it, but we haven't used that weapon yet. I believe in the recent months or year, the oppression increased so much. Like you said, it's increased so much in the last 4 years. So if we should talk, it may get worse unless we do something concretely. So my question to you, Honorable Ambassador, what concrete weapon can the United States do to Vietnam in order to stop human rights violation? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nguyen, for your questions. First of all, I want to thank you for helping to educate me on the concerns of the Vietnamese American community. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear by coming here. Your question was on the first point, how can we better advocate, I guess, for the freedoms of the Vietnamese people, both within Vietnam and also how to counter certain moves by China. And I hope that through my answers here today, I've made clear that I think U.S. policy on China is very clear, and that we have fundamental concerns with a range of Chinese behaviors that we think are threatening to America's national interests. And I think that the people in the government of Vietnam share several of those concerns, and those are areas where we work together regarding those challenges. And regarding the human rights situation in Vietnam, I hope I've made clear here today, it's a top priority for us, and we'll continue to engage very aggressively going forward. Your final question is, how can we take concrete measures to make progress on human rights and secure release of various prisoners? I guess what I would say in response to that is that I believe, and I believe that U.S. government policy is, that we need to engage on these issues for the long term and the long run. That I think we need to set a good example in the way that we respect human rights and the rule of law. I think we need to continue, when we look at certain transactions and activities with the government of Vietnam, that human rights reviews are an element of that. I think, as I said, we'll continue to engage on an annual basis through our human rights dialogues. I myself and senior U.S. government officials will continue to raise human rights issues, both in a general sense and on specific cases, in every meeting that we have. We'll continue to engage in capacity building programs designed to build the capacity of Vietnamese civil society and strengthen the rule of law in Vietnam. So I guess what I'm saying is that I believe that our best chances for success are through long-term, multifaceted engagement in a whole broad range of areas. I think that's where we stand the greatest chance of success. I once heard a very wise American once say that issues related to how Vietnam and the Vietnamese people will be governed, those decisions have to be made by Vietnam and the Vietnamese people. I think America's role is to continue to stand for what we believe in, to continue to express our views, and to continue to ensure that our engagement supports those views and progress in those areas. If there are specific cases that you'd like to talk about, I'd be happy to engage on that as well, but that would be my reply, and I appreciate your coming and conveying the views of Representative Hanna here today.
We have only about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to ask that you step aside and let the others speak. But if people can be very concise, that would be helpful and respectful to those who are waiting in line. And if I can just jump in on the question, because in a way I think it's not fair to ask the ambassador who's not setting all U.S. policy. And I see Jane in the back. She will remember that when her husband was arrested in Vietnam, I talked to Hank Paulson, who was then the Treasury Secretary, who was going to Southeast Asia, and he told them that he would not discuss any financial arrangement with Vietnam until her husband was released. He was released that day, and then they had the discussion. So the question is, how hardball are we going to pay? And it's really not the ambassador's call. That is the president's call.
Can I just add one comment on that as well? You mentioned Representative Lofgren. I think the case related to William Nguyen that we engaged on last year. Again, this was a case where we were very concerned by the detention of an American citizen. We advocated very strongly, and we're grateful that he was released quickly. I'm sure, as you're aware, there are multiple other cases involving Vietnamese Americans, and we continue to be aggressive on those cases. But I can assure you we'll be very active and very aggressive going forward. Yes.
Hello, Congresswoman and Ambassador. My name is Phuc Thang. I've lived in Santa Clara County for 38 years. I was convicted for possession for sale of meth in 2001. It all stems from my addiction to meth at the age of 17. Growing up in impoverished neighborhoods, I'm not proud of my past. I'm now a married father and two beautiful girls. I try not to think about being separated from my family, but it's hard when I see it all over the news daily. I got released 17 years ago and have been clean since my arrest in 2001. How much longer is ICE going to hold this over my head? Families belong together. Please help us from being separated from them. Not sure if you have children, but it makes me sad of the thought that they will go through if I was to be separated from them. Isn't separating families fall under human rights? Please, Ms. Lofgren, push and fight for the New Way Forward bill. And my question to the ambassador, why is Trump administration going back on the agreement with Vietnam and pushing Vietnam to take its deportees back?
If I can jump ahead, because I don't think the ambassador can explain that. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Trump administration's current policy is very wrong. He is insistent on it. So Christian or Angela, I have two staffers here. One option is to deal with our governor to see if we might secure pardons. So if you will talk to one of my, Christian is a lawyer on my staff, we will see if we can help. If we get the chance, if there's a new direction in the White House after the next election, we hope that this is one of the things that will be changed.
Thank you.
Can I make just one comment? First of all, I appreciate you raising the issue, and I appreciate you raising it in very direct and personal terms. I do want to try to clarify just a couple of elements related to this issue, which is often referred to as the removals issue. There is an existing 2008 agreement between the United States and the government of Vietnam that sets out procedures for if someone is identified by a U.S. immigration judge who is a Vietnamese national and is identified for return to Vietnam, that those procedures are laid out. And those procedures in that 2008 agreement apply to people who came to the United States after 1995. But there's nothing in that agreement, even though the agreement does not cover cases prior to 1995, there's nothing in the agreement that precludes people who came to the United States prior to 1995 to being returned if they've been identified for return by a U.S. immigration judge. And so there have been cases in the past where people in the pre-1995 category have been returned to Vietnam, and that work continues. And what the U.S. government's policy is, and what my responsibility as ambassador to Vietnam is, when we are presented with a list of individuals who have been identified by a U.S. immigration judge for return to Vietnam, our work is to go to the government of Vietnam and ask them to issue travel documents to those people so that they can be brought back home. I don't have any visibility into the process before that. I don't know exactly what goes into the considerations of the court system or the immigration judge who makes those decisions. But what I do know is when those names are presented to us, that's when we request the government of Vietnam to issue those travel documents. So I wanted to clarify that, but I particularly wanted to clarify the issue related to the agreement. I know this is a sensitive issue. I know it's a controversial issue, but there hasn't been any change to the bilateral agreement. There hasn't been a reinterpretation of the agreement. It's the fact that there is no formal agreement that covers people who came to the United States prior to 1995, but that has not precluded their return. So I
It's
just
a
wanted to clarify
policy
that.
decision that's been made in the United States about legal residence here. It's really not your fault. It's what the policy has been made here.
And if I just might lean in, one of the most precious things we have as citizens of the United States, the great manifestation of our democracy, is to vote. And while the ambassador can't make this comment, I can, and certainly Congresswoman Lofgren, this policy will change when we have a new administration put in place by the American people in November.
Thank you.
Christian?
My name is James Canfield. My question concerns the needs of natives of Vietnam who are now U.S. citizens in their efforts to maintain their relationships with family members that remain in Vietnam. I know that Vietnam uses the term Vietnamese national and Vietnamese citizen. There may well be a distinction between the two of them, but I don't understand it. And does a person retain the status of a Vietnamese national even if naturalized in the United States? And what is required for a naturalized U.S. citizen who's a native of Indonesia to be allowed to have a place to stay in Indonesia where he can be allowed to be physically present for extended period of time with his family that remains in Vietnam? Those are my questions.
Thank you for your question. Let me address it briefly, and then let me say for the more details of this, it might be better if you raise it with my colleague, Alex Denoya. But let me just say generally what I would, the advice that I have given to some of my friends in the Vietnamese American community, if someone is in the situation where they previously had Vietnamese nationality and they naturalize and acquire American citizenship, I would strongly encourage those individuals, if they do return back to Vietnam for travel, that they enter Vietnam on their American passport. Because if there were to happen to be any challenges related to that person while they're in Vietnam, if they didn't enter on their American passport, that very much complicates our ability to advocate on their behalf. Beyond that, the details that you had raised, I think it might be better if you discuss those with my colleague, Alex Denoya. But certainly there are many people, many Vietnamese Americans who've naturalized and travel back to Vietnam frequently. Again, I just encourage them to travel when they do so, to make sure they travel on their American passport if they do happen to have both passports. Okay, and my colleague Alex is right over here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. My name is Dang Pham. I'm the former senior official of the White House under the Clinton administration. I have two questions today. One have to deal with education, so switch gear a little bit. I remember back then in 1995, 96, when the United States decided to lift economic embargo against Vietnam, and Congresswoman, you were there, and you still remember that we set up the program called Vietnam Education Foundation, VEF. And we're using the leftover economic aid to Republic of Vietnam, and using that funding. And President Clinton, when he made the trip to Vietnam, he announced it. And was recently I was learned that that VEF, Vietnam Education Foundation program, was ended. I don't know what is the reason. Maybe the budget, but I doubt it, because the budget was coming from the left. Funding over from the economic aid to Republic of Vietnam. And recently I was told that, was learned that the Fulbright University in Vietnam, FUV, were established in Vietnam. And I'm wondering that what type of funding that has been put in. And I know that one of our former ambassador, previous your position, now be the vice chairman of that university. So my question is that very simple. What between the VEF and the Fulbright University in Vietnam funding? And number two, recently in the Vietnamese community here has been talking about the the old cemetery for the member of South Vietnam Armed Force, and which is one of my uncle and my cousin was laid down there. So I'm just wondering that what kind of the effort of the United States. I know that in the past you have been involved and engaged with Vietnamese officials to talk about it, and you have been visit alongside with the former U.S. Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, Mary Tanauka.
Yes, sir.
So with that, I just want to ask that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First on our educational exchange activities with Vietnam and our desire to support the further development of Vietnam's educational system. I'm very familiar with the VEF program. I think it was incredibly successful. I can get you the details on that, but I participated in an event last year in which we celebrated the end of that program, and my recollection is that it had reached its natural sunset. Was an incredibly successful program, particularly in training master's and PhD students in the sciences. And my understanding is that it had reached sort of its designated sunset provisions, but I can get you more details on that. But I think as Fulbright University Vietnam demonstrates, the United States remains committed to educational exchange and again developing Vietnam's educational system. I think Fulbright University Vietnam is one of the most important elements of our bilateral engagement today. It's fully supported by both the American and Vietnamese governments. It's a full-time, independent, liberal arts university inside Vietnam that is doing tremendous work. And if you want to see the future of Vietnam, go spend some time at FUV and see the amazing young Vietnamese students that they have there. Currently, FUV is supported by both governments. The government of Vietnam is providing in-kind donations, land, and the like for the school. The U.S. government provides funding both via the State Department and USAID, and FUV is very aggressively working on private sector support and development as well. So I do agree that educational engagement and educational development is really important to our relationship, and I think FUV represents the future of that. On the Bien Hoa Cemetery outside of Ho Chi Minh City that you mentioned, the former Arvin National Cemetery, I've had the honor of visiting there twice. Right before I came over here today, I met with my friend Nguyen Doc Tang of the Vietnamese American Foundation, who's played an important role in refurbishing the cemetery. I think that's very honorable work, and I commended him for the work that he's done. And I think, and what I told him before I came over here, is I think that kind of work is very meaningful to the Vietnamese American community. I think it's meaningful to many friends in Vietnam, and I think it's played an important role in reconciliation. I've had the honor of visiting Bien Hoa Cemetery twice, paying my respects to all the soldiers of the former South Vietnam who sacrificed in the name of patriotism. I also had the honor of visiting the Chung Son National Cemetery in Quang Tri Province, in which I paid my respects to soldiers who died fighting for the North, because my belief is that at this point in our relationship, we can recognize in a spirit of reconciliation and mutual respect the great sacrifices made on all sides, North, South, and the United States in the war. And doing that, I think, promotes reconciliation. But I've been honored to support the work that has helped to refurbish the Bien Hoa Cemetery. They've made tremendous progress. My understanding is that almost all of the graves have now been refurbished, and the state of the cemetery has improved dramatically. And what I heard today is there is additional work and requests from the community and things that they'd like to see go forward. But we're very happy to see that that work has gone forward, and I think it's a powerful symbol of reconciliation. But I appreciate you raising it. Thank you.
Congresswoman, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for having this event. My name is Tan Din. I'm a member of the community. My question is actually relating to Mr. Dang's second question to you, which you should answer, which is reconciliation. It seemed Vietnam for many years has talked about reconciliation, and to many of us, it seems that in the last 4 decades, what amount to their effort of reconciliation is calling people to forget about the war and come back to Vietnam. And so I wonder whether I assume that the issue of reconciliation, not only with respect to the man and woman American service, but also service people, but also the people who were associated with the former Republic of Vietnam. And I wonder whether that issue has been raised, and wonder what the Vietnamese response. Perhaps, next you could suggest to them that the next Prime Minister visit the U.S., he or she should pay a visit to the Vietnam War Memorial, and then follow with some concrete action that not only would help to heal the wound between the two nations, U.S. and Vietnam, but also the wound within Vietnam, among its people. For those, particularly for those who either directly or indirectly associated with the former Republic of Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. I think your statement is quite eloquent, and I've learned a lot from it, and I appreciate that. We see the situation as you do, in the sense that we hope, as the U.S. government, that we can promote reconciliation not just between the United States and Vietnam, but continued reconciliation within Vietnam, and continued reconciliation between Vietnam and the Vietnamese American community. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to come here. These are issues that we do raise with the Vietnamese government. I can say that even nearly 50 years after the war, they remain sensitive, but we think they're important. And again, to go back what I said a moment ago, my belief is that only by adopting a spirit of reconciliation, mutual respect, can we make progress on these issues. I think the fact that this tremendous work in the Bien Hoa Cemetery has gone forward, I think shows that there has been progress. But my sense is that there's a lot of work still to be done. But I very much appreciate your comments, and I take on board your suggestion, and I'll share that with my counterparts in Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to take a personal moment to thank you all to give me a chance to speak and to share my own story. This is for Mr. Ambassador. On June 12, 2018, I was arrested by Vietnamese police as I was taking a photograph as a tourist in District 1 in Saigon, South Vietnam. And I was taken to the police station where I was held for 2 days and subjected to torture. The torture was only stopped when my interrogator learned that I was an American citizen. When I was released, I immediately reported to Ms. Pam Pontius at the Consulate General in Saigon. And on October 18, I sent my request for investigation to the Vietnamese government, providing detailed information about the acts of torture, names of some of the police agents were involved. Right? My case was also reported to BPSOS, to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. On December 28, 2019, this committee conducted to a review of Vietnam's compliance with the UN Convention Against Torture, and recommended that the government of Vietnam should ensure that prosecutors and judges investigate and prosecute all such allegations, torture, and ill treatment. So far, the government has ignored my petition, and I understand that the petition for investigation submitted by other victims were tortured and also ignored by the Vietnamese government. My request to the U.S. Embassy, please ensure that the Vietnamese government initiate investigation into reported torture incident of demonstrate compliance with its own law and with the United Convention Against Torture. And that is my story.
First of all, thank you very much for raising that. Do you have your petition with you or something that you could provide us in writing?
Yes, I do. I have, I sent it, first of all, I sent it to Vietnam Embassy in D.C.
Okay.
Also, I sent to U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam, and also to the Consul Generation in Saigon, Vietnam.
Okay, good.
Also, we have met last year in D.C.
Why don't we do this? If you can give it to us again, I think the ambassador is prepared to look at it anew and see what we can.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So I'm sorry that this happened to you, and I didn't quite catch, you did contact the consulate in Ho Chi Minh City?
Yes.
Good. And it sounds like that had some effect, and that part I'm pleased about. I'm sorry that you went through that. But I'd be happy if we could get another copy of your petition. I'd be happy to convey it to Vietnam, to the Vietnamese government. And actually, my colleague Alex would be happy to take it.
The man holding his hand right there.
So thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
So we're at 3:15. We said we were going to hold it off, but there are just 4 people left. So let's do this. Ask these 4 to be very concise, and we'll close it off at the lady who is last in line currently. Hello, Van.
Hello, my name is Vân Lê, and I'm Eastside Board Trustee and also a community leaders. First, I have a question that I want to thank you, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, as well, and Anna Eshoo, that organized this town hall for the time that we can hear from our ambassador. And I know that you have a tough job, and you listen a lot of tough questions. So my question is, please share with us about your thought about the preparation for the potential replacement of the leadership roles in Vietnam. My second question, as a board trustee of Eastside Union High School District, I heard you mention about 30,000 Vietnamese students have come to United States or study abroad. But some of them, I was wondering that, do we have a fair share and a fair process for the family did not have the money to come to United States to learn? And also in Eastside Union High School District, we have the international program, but the program will allow the student to come to study only 1 year, and they have to come back. And they have to apply and come back again with another year. So I think this is a very difficult situation for the students as well as the board trustee, but I appreciate all your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vân Lê. Leadership transition in Vietnam. I would say, in all candor, it's probably not appropriate for me as an American diplomat to comment in detail, but I do want to say, obviously, I think that many people inside and outside Vietnam are following closely what will be Vietnam's next Party Congress in early 2021. There will almost certainly, among the many decisions they'll make decisions on Vietnam's leadership lineup and policy direction for the next 5 years. You know, as the U.S. government, we're going to watch those events with great interest, and we're going to work with whoever is identified as Vietnam's next leaders. And we also look forward to seeing what they decide to announce regarding their future policy direction. I am confident that they will continue to recognize the importance of their relationship with the United States. On the second question about Vietnamese students.
Ambassador, can I interrupt? Because Supervisor Cindy Chavez is here, has joined us. She has another hearing that she has to go to, but I hope you'll join me in thanking her for being here. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you so much, and thank you to Supervisor Chavez for allowing us to do this here today. obviously, educational exchange is hugely important. We do have a number of programs. There are various U.S. government-sponsored exchange programs where we identify students that are funded on these U.S. government programs. I know various educational institutions have educational assistance, and then I know many Vietnamese parents who make great sacrifices to support the education of their children in the United States. I'm not sure what beyond that you might have in mind for supporting study abroad, but if you have specific ideas, I'd be very much open to them. And perhaps if you could pass those on to me or to my colleague Alex, who is very popular over here on this side of the auditorium. But we're very eager to promote this kind of educational exchange. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do. I can assure you of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Congresswoman and Zoe Lofgren. I owe you a lot. My first question is about security law, but you already answered that. So the second part that I would like to ask for your immediate attention and involvement, Mr. Ambassador, is regarding to the process for non-immigrant and immigrant visa at the U.S. consulates in Saigon. There has been, from my observation, there has been a lot of issue going on with that, and they are ranging from either long delaying or improper denial, miss the evidence submitted. So as a result, it's not only create a negative impact to us as the office, but also as a nation. And I believe under your jurisdiction, you can do that and make some change if possible, so we all can benefit. And again, I thank you so much for your service and all of your time here.
Thank you very much for your questions. It sounds like we've already addressed the cybersecurity law issue, but on the visa issue, I'd be interested in knowing what your specific concerns are. I know that based on demand during high travel seasons, based on fluctuation in our staffing sometimes, that wait times can vary. But if you have a particular concern or if there's a particular case that you're worried about, I hope that you'll let me or my colleague Alex know about it. On the issue you mentioned of improper denials, I think every American diplomat, every American Foreign Service officer works as a consular officer at some point during their career. These are challenging jobs in which we're under challenging conditions and a short amount of time tasked with implementing U.S. immigration law in the best way possible. For most people coming on non-immigrant visas, the intent of the law is designed to put the burden on the applicant to demonstrate why they will return to their home country after a brief visit to the United States, and that's what most consular officers look at. Certainly our job is to implement U.S. law as faithfully as possible. But if you do have specific concerns on a particular case or trends that you've seen, I hope that you'll let me or my colleague Alex know, and we'll be happy to take a look at it. Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon. Dear Ambassador, dear Congresswoman, my name is Tran Vu. I'm a director of Association of Vietnamese Elderly of the Bay Area. Mr. Ambassador, please let us know of your thought regarding of a relationship between the United States and Vietnam in the light of the coronavirus spreading down to many countries, including the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tran Vu. That's a very important topic. Here's what I would say. I think I mentioned earlier that our largest team in the U.S. mission is our health team. And again, they're there to do a number of things, including build Vietnam's health capacity and their ability to detect and control the spread of pandemic diseases. Now, in the face of this challenge of the COVID-19 outbreak, I think we can see the value of the work that they do. What my colleagues and I on our health team believe is that the government of Vietnam is taking this COVID-19 situation extremely seriously. They've been very proactive. We think the government of Vietnam has done an outstanding job in its response. We'd like to see that continue. And we believe that the government of Vietnam is doing everything that we had hoped it would do. I think the challenge going forward is, if you look at what U.S. experts say, including our experts at the Centers for Disease Control, there are many unknowns about this virus, and I think that's the main challenge going forward. But I'm confident that the government of Vietnam, to the best of its ability, is trying to respond in a proactive and responsible way. We're grateful to them for that. I'm also particularly grateful that the government of Vietnam has been very transparent and very cooperative with us, including with our Centers for Disease Control. The Centers for Disease Control is providing training on laboratory techniques, training and advice and assistance on how to track cases. We're in the process of providing Vietnam with test kits, and the U.S. Agency for International Development is in the process of procuring for Vietnam various personal protective equipment for the public and for healthcare workers. So we're committed to assist Vietnam in this fight. This is our collective fight that we have to win together, and we'll continue to take it very seriously. But again, I want to say that our assessment is the government of Vietnam has responded effectively thus far. We're grateful for that. We're also grateful for their cooperation and transparency. We look forward to continuing that going forward. 16 total cases confirmed in Vietnam so far. Thank you very much.
And here's our last speaker.
Ambassador and Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I ask for your attention and advocacy for two groups of people. One is the Highlander Christian, and the other is political prisoner. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a clinical social worker. And in late 2018, I was recruited by both People SOS through the local Vietnamese American mental health network to help them, help the both People SOS legal team to help the refugee in Thailand, because many of them have heavy mental health issue and they don't know how to help. So I went to Thailand for 1 week. During that week, both People SOS arranged for me to meet about 500 refugees, most of them from the highland of Vietnam, Hmong, Montana, and also all the Highlanders and the King people too. So among them was about 300 Hmongs and Montanas, and others are Highlander Christian. I didn't know about them before. I went there to do mental health assessment and then to do the basic mental health training for the legal team, so they would be able to help these people out while they're waiting for their refugee status. The refugee mental health problem mostly include PTSD, major depressive disorder, anxiety, and so on, with the full range of symptom and behavior as the result of their trauma, such as being arrested, put in jail, tortured, and some of their family member was killed. Both People SOS report that they have documented like some 5,000 Hmong Christians rendered stateless because they had refused to renounce their faith per order of the local Vietnamese authority in their home village and in the northwestern highlands. They were evicted from their village, and after years of wandering, many of them finally settled in the central highland. The government there refused to issue them household registration and citizenship ID, making them functionally stateless in their own country. They can open a bank account or obtain legal employment own a business or even request a marriage certificate. Their children either did not get a birth certificate or they get listed as fatherless on their birth certificate. Many sub-communities have repeatedly petitioned to the government for remedies, but to no avail. A similar situation affected some of the 5,000 Montana Christians in the Central Highlands. So our recommendation, and I hope that we get support from you to get the Vietnam Prime Minister issue instruction to the government authority in the Central Highlands to immediately issue household registration, citizenship ID, marriage certificate to all those affected. The Prime Minister should also issue instruction to the province in the Northwestern Highlands to immediately stop their policy to force Hmong Christians to renounce their faith. Similarly to the Montana Christians in the Central Highlands. And I have a group of friends who work as independent news reporter that know about a dozen of political prisoners. They was captured and jailed during the 80s, 1980. They were released about 20 years ago, but right now they fear that they will be rounded up again and put inside isolation, and it means that right now with the sensitive time, maybe they won't come back again, so please pay attention to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you have any further information that you have with you that you could share with me or my colleague Alex, I'd love to take that on board and to see what kind of advocacy we could do for the communities that you've outlined. I did want to underscore, because I had mentioned earlier that, you know, I had, for example, engaged with various Catholic communities across Vietnam. I did just want to emphasize what the U.S. government stands for is the religious freedom of all believers and all adherents to freely practice their faith and their beliefs, whatever they may be. So, for example, I've also had the pleasure of engaging broadly with the Buddhist community in Vietnam and had the pleasure of meeting the Venerable Thích Quang Do and Thich Nhat Hanh. I know that my colleagues, particularly in our consulate in Ho Chi Minh City, are aware of the challenges for Highland Christians that you had mentioned, and also for former political prisoners. But I appreciate your sharing further details about that. We'd be happy to advocate on those issues further, and if you have more information you could pass, I'd be grateful.
Thank you very much. I'll just add that members of the Vietnam Caucus are adopting prisoners of conscience, each one of us, to help advocate for freedom. And, you know, the Secretary of State has to personally meet with the chair and senior minority member of the House and Senate Judiciary Committee and Immigration Subcommittee. So once a year, I meet with the Secretary of State. And I will say that when it was Secretary Kerry and Secretary Colin Powell, they were particularly concerned about the Montagnards because they knew those individuals personally from their service in the war. We have now virtually eliminated the refugee program, which is, I just think, an outrageous circumstance. So people who are waiting to be refugees to come to the United States will wait for the foreseeable future. There's no capacity given the current limit, which is unwarranted and, by the way, unprecedented. We've never had a limit this low. So I just wanted to say that's another thing. It's not the ambassador's bailiwick. It's something we need to deal with as Americans here. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador and Congresswoman Eshoo. And the sheriff was here a minute ago, too. Let's give thanks to her.
Mr. Ambassador, can I leave you a letter?
Yes, ma'am.
and a report with more detail.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Should I give?
Well, can I just say thank you, Representative Lofgren, Representative Eshoo, and thank you to all of you who spent time with us here today. I've learned a lot. I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you very much.
Tôi cứ bỏ cái đi, không chụp cho. Ra đi cha.